Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. In today's program, the SF Office of Economic and Workforce Development and Human Rights Commission department heads will talk economic recovery. A special thanks, the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefings are supported by a grant from MetaFund. Thank you. The important and ongoing work of the San Francisco Interfaith Council would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our previous virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcriptions. San Francisco and surrounding counties are requiring masking in indoor public places for everyone as a precaution against the increased circulation of COVID-19. This includes settings like houses of worship, grocery or retail stores, theaters, and family entertainment centers. For updates, watch for SFIC emails as the health orders evolve. Anyone 12 and older will need to show proof of vaccination to go indoors in some places in San Francisco, like restaurants and bars, gyms and clubs, and large indoor events and business that serve food or drink indoors. To find your vaccination record, go to myvaccinerecord.cdph.ca.gov. Get vaccinated, San Francisco. The vaccines are safe and effective. Go to sf.gov/get vaccinated to find a vaccine site in your neighborhood. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco. Together we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Trey, and thank you for all you do to support these programs. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. San Francisco Mayor London Breed and Board of Supervisors President Norman Yee created the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force, which met from April through October of 2020. The purpose of the Economic Recovery Task Force was to guide the city's efforts through the COVID-19 recovery, sustain and revive local businesses and employment, mitigate the economic hardships already affecting the most vulnerable San Franciscans, and build a resilient and equitable future. The 41 policy recommendations developed by the task force lay the groundwork for an equitable and sustainable recovery that builds on our strengths and addresses those sectors and populations most significantly impacted by the pandemic. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council, welcomes San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development Director, Kate Sofis, and San Francisco Human Rights Commission Executive Director, Sheryl Davis, who will report on their vision and priorities for their respective departments' roles in San Francisco's economic recovery, offer updates on actions taken to implement the economic recovery recommendations, and share how their two departments are working collaboratively. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome San Francisco Interfaith Council founder and past chair, Rita Semmel.
Good morning and welcome to everyone. I'd like to read a statement that we read every week. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we're invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other so that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Rita. And to our attendees, by virtue of being attendees, you receive our frequent emails, and you probably noticed in your emails this week an invitation to join us for an interfaith Thanksgiving service 2 days before Thanksgiving, at which time we will be celebrating Rita's centennial birthday. I hope you can all join us. Please register online and let us be together and give thanks for all of our blessings, as well as for our dear Rita. That will take place on the 23rd of November at Congregation Emmanuel at 10 a.m. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Reverend Joanne Lee, the Associate Pastor for Community Formation at Calvary Presbyterian Church. We don't do anything by chance, and so I was very intentional in inviting Joanne because, as many of you know, today is International Shakeout Day. In October, we remember the Loma Prieta earthquake, and it was at Calvary Presbyterian where birth was given to the San Francisco Interfaith Council as a result of a group of faith leaders who had come together to distribute funds from Church World Service to folks who had been displaced by the earthquake. So Calvary has a very special place and relationship to our council. So Joanne, we are so happy to have you with us today. And would you lead us in a reflective moment and ground us?
Yes, thank you, Michael. It is a privilege and honor to be with you all this morning. I apologize that I'm going to have to reflect and run. I won't be able to stay for the whole program. I have 3 children who have to be at 3 different schools between the hours of 9 and 9:30. So I'm grateful for the time that I will be with you all, and thank you for your understanding. I invite you to just take a deep breath in and out. See if you can hear the rain that is watering the earth that needs it so deeply. And I don't know about you, but I've just been trying to keep my head above water during this pandemic. And underneath that water, I am just treading, right? And because of that feeling of treading in these waters of the pandemic and not knowing where the shoreline is, I have come back to a poem that I was introduced to early on in my ministry. And it has helped me to maybe stop treading for a little bit, because really I'm not going anywhere and have very little control of when this will end and what will happen next, and to just sort of allow myself to do starfish, which is what my kids learned as they were swimming, and just float on the water for a bit, because we all need a little bit of that right now. And I've learned that during this pandemic, it is really helpful for my brain to hear something twice rather than just once, to be able to process it. So I'm going to read this poem once, give us a little bit of time to process it, and then read it one more time. So hear now these words. It might be a poem familiar to you. It's called Avowal by Denise Levertov. Listen now for these words. As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky, as hawks rest upon air and air sustains them, so would I learn to attain free fall and float into Creator Spirit's deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all surrounding grace.
Call from the wireless call.
Hear again these words. As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky and water bears them, as hawks rest upon air and air sustains them, so would I learn to attain free fall and float into Creator Spirit's deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all surrounding grace. Let us pray. Thank you, Creator Spirit, for your deep embrace. Thank you for your all surrounding grace. Be with us now as we listen to and for one another. We pray in your many names. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Joanne. Thank you for grounding us this morning. And we pray you're grounded as you begin your tasks of the day. God bless you. Today's program is a really important program. I think back to 2008, the beginning of the Great Recession, when when the San Francisco Interfaith Council began to convene the CEOs of the major faith-based social service agencies. So many of them were doing business with the city and had contracts with the city to ensure the safety net for the most vulnerable residents of our city. And at that time, during the recession, budgets had to be cut by 30% and staff and programs disappeared. So when the pandemic began, and we were hearing, the economic impact, projected numbers, I thought to myself, good goodness, the city has got a huge task in front of it. Thankfully, the federal government and the state government have come to our aid, but the challenges that this pandemic has posed economically to our city have been no small feat for our presenters today. With us today is Kate Sofis, the Director of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Sheryl Davis, Executive Director for the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, with whom I had the privilege of serving on the commission when we were both commissioners. Kate, there's so much to say, and welcome. You are relatively new to the position, and so we welcome you to our greater family, and walk us through this.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I have some slides, but I think I would also prefer to, in addition to a few of them, talk from my heart today. I have been with the city now for 6 months, and I actually came to this role from the private sector, from a nonprofit sector, having started and run an organization here in the city called SF Made that works to support manufacturers and makers and artisans. And before that, had spent my career in the private sector, but all along have worked very closely with city government. So a lot of what I learned, and also had the pleasure to serve on the Economic Recovery Task Force before I joined the city, a lot of what I have done and learned over the years has always been in partnership across the public sector, the private sector, our nonprofits, our faith-based communities. It really does take a village, and especially now in this moment in time that we are all living through, it takes all of us to really look differently at how we want to rebuild our city and our support systems. And I often think about times like this when we have so many challenges that we are facing across so many of our communities, but also like to look at these moments as opportunities as well, to look at how we emphasize different needs than we perhaps paid attention to in the past, how we reimagine our city to be this place, this shining jewel, as I look at the image on the slide in front of you, that can be not just a regional leader, a leader in California, a leader in the country, a leader in the world for what truly an equitable economic recovery looks like. So as I talk a little bit about the things we have done and the things we're working on in our department, I just want everyone to know that underneath the numbers and the budgets and the programs it really does all come back to co-creating this vision of the San Francisco. So many of us moved here, as I did 30 years ago, to build, or that our children who are born and raised here want us to be, that this is that moment. Next slide, please. So the Office of Economic and Workforce Development is the department in San Francisco that is focused on business, helping businesses of all sizes start and grow and ideally stay, and in this pandemic, stay open to flourish. We are focused as well on our workforce, so helping people develop and access pathways to the very jobs that the businesses that we help support here in the city create. In doing all of that, we are also focusing on helping create, in partnership with other departments like our MTA and Rec and Park, creating communities and neighborhoods that are made up, of course, of our residents, our businesses, our community organizations. So creating whole neighborhoods. And then we actually have a piece of our work that partners with real estate development to look at large scale projects that can provide space for jobs, affordable housing, and other use for the city moving forward. Next slide, please. So if you look at sort of the totality of what OEWD does, we have our Office of Small Business and sort of at the top of the pyramid, and that really is our front line, sort of our front door for many businesses who are just starting out. And really during the pandemic, it became our call center for any of our businesses who needed assistance during the pandemic. And we had so many, and still have so many, small businesses in certain sectors and in certain neighborhoods that have struggled and continue to struggle. And that relates to our Invest in Neighborhoods team, who partners with our Office of Small Business and many of our opportunity neighborhoods, including the Fillmore, the Bayview, Chinatown, Japantown, to help communities and the businesses in those communities that have really suffered disproportionately during the pandemic. We also have a team called Business Development that works on industries. So working with tech, working with manufacturing as an example, working with our film industry. And then all of that connects to our workforce development programs. Many of the recommendations of the Economic Recovery Task Force were squarely focused on workforce development and on providing supports to displaced workers. And as often happens, it seems, in our society, the folks who were most impacted from health outcomes during the pandemic and from job loss during the pandemic were our racially diverse communities, our low-income communities, folks who had the double whammy of having jobs in sectors that had to shut down initially, such as restaurants, hospitality, and at the same time having so limited savings and other assets that they really didn't have much to go on during those periods of job loss. On the other hand, we see industries, knowledge-based industries such as finance or technology and even city government. Many of us were able to work from home for so much of the pandemic, and we did not experience the same degree of job loss, and we did not also experience the same adverse health outcomes. So we are really kind of working back from a deficit in some of our communities. And I know my colleague, Director Davis, will talk a little bit more about how we are partnering together to do that. But that is squarely one of our key focus areas going forward. And last but not least, we have our joint development team, which again works on larger real estate development projects on behalf of the city. And we actually, because economic recovery is so important, we've created a new team within OEWD called Economic Recovery Initiatives and Regeneration. And that team, and I'll talk a bit more about it, is there to make sure that not only do we focus as OEWD on some of the things that I'll lay out, but that economic recovery is much bigger than any one city department. So we want to make sure that we are constantly looking across all of our city departments and moving together in our economic recovery. And so that includes coordinating with our Department of Children, Youth, and their families around things such as childcare supports for working families, education. It obviously includes coordinating strongly with the Human Rights Commission, and we'll be talking about that in a minute, and other agencies across the city. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, during the last 18 months, almost 2 years, OEWD pivoted from really looking forward towards economic development to really being a frontline crisis response center. Our Office of Small Business and our Workforce Division both set up sort of emergency hotlines and fielded over 25,000 calls. We have had just never-ending sets of webinars on everything from how to access supports for your family during the pandemic, during job loss, to helping small businesses obtain federal payroll protection loans from the SBA, to deploying a myriad of targeted small business loan and grant programs and relief programs to more than 3,000 small businesses. And that work continues. Next slide. At the same time, we recognize that economic recovery is not a moment in time. It's a path that we are all on, and that path requires sustained additional investments to help us recover, and help us recover in a way that brings all of us together. So in the budget that we are now working under, we have more funding to continue focusing on small business relief. We have a real focus on arts and culture as part of not only something we need to do to support all of our creative sector and our artists, but something that we also think is going to be important to making our streets feel alive again and safe and engaging, so that residents and workers can once again feel excited about coming out and shopping and going to their offices. We are continuing to provide sustained efforts to help, again, the most vulnerable residents of our community recover, find jobs, particularly for those industries such as hospitality that are not coming back nearly as fast as other industries. And then we have made almost $15 million of new investments to help reopen our city core. And I will talk about that in just a minute. Next slide. So the economic recovery plan itself had many, many different recommendations, too many to go through today, but we have worked to really seat those recommendations under 5 broad strategies that we have begun and will continue pursuing moving forward for the indefinite future. So the first is focusing again on our most vulnerable businesses, particularly our smaller businesses in our neighborhoods, particularly the same neighborhoods where we know there have been so many individuals and families who have really struggled during the pandemic. So we focus on communities and on the businesses in those communities particularly. And again, those include communities such as the Bayview, Fillmore, Chinatown, Japantown, the Mission, as examples. And these are communities that also are the seats of some of our most vibrant immigrant and ethnic communities, Latino community in the Mission, Chinese immigrant community, of course, in Chinatown, Japantown, and the Black community in Bayview Hunters Point in the Fillmore. We are also now, as we are starting to see some recovery of our businesses, and I think on the broad spectrum, if you look at our economic recovery metrics as a city, we're doing okay. As a whole, our unemployment rate has gone down, and many of our larger job generating industry sectors, technology as one example, have come back and are actually doing reasonably well and have begun hiring again. So part of what we are looking at in our workforce recovery is both providing direct support to individuals who've been displaced from industries that are not doing as well, such as hospitality, and providing training or retraining to help them develop skills in emerging industries that are doing well. So in addition to technology, we are seeing a real increase, and maybe this is another one of those silver linings out of a pandemic in our healthcare, our life science industry, our advanced manufacturing industry. These are all places where we're seeing job growth. And so a lot of our focus beyond providing direct supports to individuals is now helping folks retrain and then reconnect and building pipelines into those new industries. Another piece of doing that is working very closely with employers and employing something that has been used in our in the way that we approach work and workforce in the skilled trades to all fields, and that's the concept of apprenticeship. So in addition to training up someone, let's say in computer programming, then we actually want to work with employers to create paid apprenticeship programs so that we can then move that individual from training into a paid on-the-job work opportunity and into a full-time job. So those are really some of the cornerstones of how we are approaching workforce development right now in the city. Number 3, so one of those industries that is so important, we think, to our self understanding of what San Francisco is, as well as the world, is we're this city, this jewel on the West Coast that people have traveled to from across the country. That's how I ended up here. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I used to dream about coming to a place like San Francisco 30 years ago when I came out here. We are a city filled with folks who dreamed recently and came here and have come here from other countries as tourists and then moved here. We are a city made up of folks from all over the United States who came here when they were younger or when they were older, seeking the openness and the innovation and the reputation, and I think the authentic piece that we are about being open and willing to try new things and work together. And then we are a city of people who are born and raised here. And I've got several, 3 to be exact, SF-made teenagers born and raised here in San Francisco and who hope to stay here and participate in our economy. So we want to be a place for all of those, but our tourism is not only the gateway to how people first experience San Francisco, it's also a very large part of our economy. And we have had more of a struggle than most US cities in getting it back and getting it back as fast as other cities. And it is in part because our tourism is made up of both business tourism. So when we have these big conventions and our companies bring people from all over the world to Salesforce or to Oracle, those are all conventions that feed our hotels, our restaurants. And we are also a destination for many, many international tourists who have not been able to come into this country, actually. That's going to start to change a bit, we hope, on November 8th. But because of the pandemic, our reliance on international tourism has really been a challenge. And that has in turn impacted our hotels, our entertainment, our folks who provide tours for visitors, and certainly our visitor and convention business as a whole. The last estimates we saw from SF Travel, it may take up to 5 years to fully get back to where we were. And so that means we have a longer tail of recovery for some of our industries most impacted, particularly hospitality. Going back to strategies, so continuing to really support our mixed-use neighborhoods as we've been discussing. And then last but not least, we know that our street conditions and street safety and our homeless and unhoused folks, and we have had more people, working families with kids, really struggle and not have stable housing throughout the pandemic. We know that as a region, we still have the most unaffordable housing in the country. And that was an issue before the pandemic. It's even more of an issue for folks now. So we know that while we don't within OEWD have all the solutions to housing, that we need to continue to work to create safe spaces for all, for our workers to come back to downtown. And we believe that having a vibrant arts and entertainment and culture out in the community, and both in our neighborhoods and in our downtown city core, is going to be a really important part to how we breathe life back into San Francisco. The last thing I will say, it's not on this slide, but I do want to talk briefly about our downtown. It is probably not lost on many of you if you have had the need to go to Union Square or into the heart of our financial district, that employees are not fully back to work yet. And so those areas can feel very desolate. And we recognize there's been a fundamental shift in how people shop and retail. And that was happening before the pandemic, but it's been accelerated where people shop online. And I just want to say today that we are very committed. This mayor is very committed to working collaboratively with our employers to encourage them to start bringing folks back to work. We know that for many businesses, they will be working indefinitely, where folks are sometimes remote and sometimes in the office. We think that that will be an opportunity to bring more smaller kinds of office users into our city core. But we are very committed to getting folks back. And when it comes to shopping, some of our neighborhoods, actually small local retail in neighborhoods like West Portal or even 3rd Street in the Bayview, actually some have done very well during the pandemic. So that's another silver lining. But we are also committed to helping Union Square, sort of the heart of our shopping district, come back to life. That's going to require some creativity. It will not have the same number of large department stores necessarily, but we are also committed to keeping the department stores we have and to working hard with property owners, with retailers to fill the vacancies that are there and get the core of our shopping district back on track. And next slide. So with that, I'd like to invite my colleague, Director Dr. Sheryl Davis, to talk about how some of what we are doing at OEWD layers into her work.
Thank you, Director Sofis, and as always to Rita Simmel and Director Michael Pappas. Thank you so much for the opportunity to engage and participate in the conversation with the Interfaith Council. Always an honor to be here, as I've shared with you all in the past. Really very strong faith-based foundation and roots. And as we're here talking about recovery and the work and what it looks like to do this, I've shared before that some of my favorite poems were learned as part of programs for church. And I was just thinking, as Kate was talking and going back and forth, this idea of recovery and what does it look like to be resilient and hopeful and to really be encouraging folks through this process. And it just made me think of a Langston Hughes poem where it's called Mother to Son. And in that poem, it's the mother saying to her son, really don't lose hope, to keep going. And it starts with this line that says, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It has tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor bare. But all the time I've been a climbing on. And so for that line, I just see and thank you, Michael and the Interfaith Council, for continuing to push and climb and encourage and to share information. And so much of this that Kate was talking about as well is really what were things like before the pandemic? What are the things that we needed to be addressing? How are we continue to push on and stay hopeful, even though it's been difficult and it hasn't been a crystal stair? Unemployment actually the communities of color and low-income communities were already disproportionately impacted by unemployment. You know, that is something that existed. That is something that Kate and her office were working on before the pandemic. And so that was something that was a challenge. Education, the achievement gaps, and those things that really determine in a lot of ways where people will go in terms of employment opportunities was also prevalent before COVID-19. The income gaps, San Francisco was reported to have one of the largest wealth gaps in the nation before the pandemic. And so that has only been exacerbated. And we also know so many of the social determinants of health are connected to income inequality. And so some of those health disparities in some of the neighborhoods that, which is good to hear, Kate, that those neighborhoods actually didn't suffer maybe as badly as others, that maybe there's some way that the pandemic gave them a little bit where folks were shopping more locally and maybe benefited those areas. So if we go to the next slide, you know, we're really talking about when we look at this, and really one of the things I've appreciated working with Kate is when we talk about industry, right? These pieces and places and retail, culinary, hospitality, and really talking about like the connection of those, but they were disproportionately impacted by that. And the conversations around how do we bring in manufacturing, how do we bring in some of these other spaces and places and make those connections so that we've not, and I would say what we saw, and Kate showed it in her slides, was that the response for some of this, like I would say specifically around culinary, the ability to really pivot and support some restaurants, especially our small restaurants, to be able to address some of the health disparities that we were seeing, right? Where we saw SF New Deal, and we saw a lot of our smaller restaurant owners able to now come in and work together to build and put together meals for distribution to our seniors, to folks in public housing, to our youth. That was one of the things I was really excited to see, that for some of the school meals, that was leveraging our small businesses to be able to support that. And I'm really excited about the interest and the support that's happening citywide for hospitality. Individuals, so the financial, the mental, the physical toll that it took on communities and with individuals that were already struggling, but that they were now, for some folks who were living paycheck to paycheck, who now weren't even able to go to work because of the pandemic. We know that those individuals were hard hit. And then the work, you all have had lots of conversations with Department of Public Health, the work of the COVID-19 data tracker, like just lays bare what happens within neighborhoods, and then ACE, and then within the race ethnicities. And really one of the struggles has been within our racial conclaves around addressing the health disparities and the toll that COVID-19 took on those communities. But then also you add to that the things that we saw happening with the uptick in Asian hate crimes, when we see and talk about the social civic unrest that came with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, when we talk about what was happening with our Latinx population here in San Francisco, just being very intentional to understand that there were some other layers beyond COVID-19 that were impacting certain communities. We can go to the next slide. So wanted to just share some of what we have been working on and some of the strategies that have been deployed since that time. And then just also kind of connected back to the Economic Recovery Task Force and some of the things, like there were basically 8 themes that came out of that. And within the HRC, Human Rights Commission, some of the work and some of the partnerships that we've been building on really focus on, I would say, 4 of them, right? Pursue economic justice, invest in housing, meet the basic needs of the vulnerable, imagine and build stronger neighborhoods. And I would argue that Kate really talked about in her first part there, the first part of that, which is the local economic stimulus, job connections, promoting safe reopening, preserving operations and lessening the regulatory burdens. But where where I'm focusing a little bit right now is this idea of meeting the basic needs of the vulnerable, and wanted to start with 4 very specific efforts and initiatives that we have launched or supported during this time. One was the launch of the Human Rights Commission Roundtable, which really started as a very small group of folks saying, like, what do we need to do? How do we support the different communities? How do we support and address the health disparities? And how do we give voice to folks who feel a little bit disconnected? And so since March of 2020, we've had 82 meetings as the roundtable. What started as 4 or 5 people now has a database of several hundred folks who engage and come to speak specifically about cultural, community, really neighborhood-based concerns and issues. Out of the roundtable, we started community resilience caravans, which were every Tuesday, which was partnered with many faith-based leaders, a group of folks driving through different neighborhoods on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, passing out PPE, giving out flyers and information around what supports they could access. We also helped support and launch of the Latino Task Force, which has been really instrumental over the last year in meeting and working with the Latinx community, but has really spread and done so much more. They're doing work in Bayview and the OMI, really standing up their model of engagement and community, centering community in response. Also worked with and staffed and helped launch Mega Black SF, which has been started again as a core group of about 12 people that was focused on addressing the challenges brought on community by COVID-19, but also to own and admit the things that had happened and the disparities that existed pre-COVID. And that group started with 12 members or 12 partners, and now has a database of over 400 folks who engage and participate in different activities. Some of the efforts and work of Mega Black SF has been supporting Black entrepreneurs, and was able to work with the Ferry Building when it opened back up for its first kind of Saturday farmers market, Juneteenth of this year, to host 20 plus vendors who were able to sell their food and their products at the Ferry Building as a part of the farmers market there. And I was really happy to see, Michael, that you all still have the Stand Together SF slide as a part of your work. That was an initiative that we launched really in response to the uptick in Asian hate that was happening, and worked with COVID Command Center, the Emergency Operations Center, it's had all the different names, EOC, CCC, to launch Stand Together SF, which was a great partnership. Worked with, I saw Reverend Fong was on, worked with a lot of our partners in the Asian community to really be intentional, worked with NIMS and worked with SCDC, Samoan Community Development Center, to really be intentional about centering those voices and doing that work. So have been really grateful for a lot of the different projects and partnerships. In addition to these that have been listed here, we also did work around public safety landscape analysis through the roundtable, launched the Educational Equity Initiative, which this summer partnered with the public library to develop a curriculum packet that looked at racial diversity and conversations, and highlighted books from the American Indian community, as well as the Asian community. And we were able to give out over 10,000 books as a part of that, as well as computers and other supplies. We also were able to launch through the roundtable, the Tenderloin Roundtable, which really focused on responding to the homelessness issue, and was very integral. And I know Trey, who's on, also helped convene a lot of those meetings, and community members who felt disconnected and felt that their voices weren't being heard. So that is some of the initial response that we had as a part of this work. Trey, if we go, Montana, we can go to the next slide. So really have been focusing on from investment to impact, right? Those first pieces were kind of focused on that notion of like, who are the communities that we're engaging with? What does it look like to center their voices and lived experience as we move this work? And kind of where we are now on the other end of this, the The Latino task force has been able to stand up hubs, as I mentioned, throughout different communities. Mayor Breed launched the Dreamkeeper Initiative, which is $60 million in funding to support the Black community. Mentioned the public safety landscape. We've been working with the mayor's office as well as with Supervisor Marr's office to really get an inventory, because one of the things that we saw is that the reporting of hate incidents or hate crimes wasn't being captured, or wasn't, the city has a lot of resources available, but that we hadn't really done an alignment of those resources to be responsive to hate incidents, right? Like, we talk a lot about racial equity, we talk about our vulnerable populations, but we haven't really talked enough about like creating safe spaces and how to address that when it's not a physical, a violent crime that happens to someone. And that makes it very difficult to address hate incidents because the police department is focusing on hate crimes. So what is this public safety landscape? How are we doing prevention? How are we doing intervention? How are we doing response? But also, how are we really just trying to make sure that there are safe spaces? And so have been doing a lot of work around that. And then Children and Family Recovery Task Force is something that was recently launched and is in response, direct response, and that's being headed by Department of Children and Their Families, as well as Abigail Stewart-Kahn. And I'm a part of that, and Mayor Breed has been very clear that she wants to make sure that this is responsive and listening to community, and that it's community centered. And so there is that effort that's happening now, because we don't want to lose sight of the fact that, you know, whether we're calling it distance learning or unfinished learning, but the impact that the COVID-19 has had on learning in general. And one of the things, and Kate has mentioned this before, we've talked a lot about learning, but we haven't really talked about the disproportionate impact on students with learning differences or students with disabilities. And so when we talk about virtual learning, we know how frazzled we are as adults after a day full of Zoom. We can only imagine what that's doing to our young people. We can only imagine what that, you know, I'm very fortunate that my son is now grown, and, you know, he was doing Zoom from a distance while he was in college, but I can't imagine what that must have been like to been at home with your children, doing school, doing work, and then doing life, and not maybe being able to go outside. And so that has taken a toll on families and young people in general, but very specifically. So doing focus there and doing the layers of intersectionality around that. So I think that was that the last one, Montana? I think so. So with that, I will pass it back over to you, Michael.
Sheryl, thank you so much. Kate, thank you so much. What has impressed me about this presentation more than anything is your interdisciplinary approach. You know, when we first were doing the programming for this, like, great, let's get Kate Sofis. She's new on the job here. And it was Kate who said, got to have Sheryl with us. And so it really kind of talks about the sensitivity of the city to all of the moving pieces that are going on in terms of the response. I will tell you both, I've never been more proud to be a San Franciscan. I remember the very, very early days of the pandemic. In fact, the 27th of February 2020, when the mayor declared the state of emergency. And this was before there was just even one reported case, but you know, she looked into a crystal ball, made decisive decisions early, and all of a sudden we became a model for the nation of what cities should do. The decisions that were made early on were going to have economic impact, and they continue to. The pandemic is not over. I'm wondering if the two of you can just sort of share with us, give us a little peek into the window of how you advise the city from your perches on that economic impact as part of the bigger policy planning.
I can start with that. You know, I sort of had a ringside seat because when all of this started, I was still running SF Made. We have about, believe it or not, about 700 manufacturers of various sizes, from Anchor Brewing, you know, down to tiny little 2-person clothing makers here in the city. So the city was very communicative with us right in the very beginning about how the shutdown was going to potentially impact businesses. And in my case at the time, it was small manufacturers. So a couple of things that I will remark. The first was how communicative this city government was. And so my experience being a connector point to a whole set of small businesses was mirrored in how the city was communicating with the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, or how the city was communicating with, you know, construction. And that right there stood out to me and continues to stand out to me. I don't believe that most other US cities sort of approached it that way. So while the certainly the health orders and the shutdowns were very much driven by public health, it was made clear to us in the business community about how and why and what the thinking was around some of the rules about which businesses could stay open and which couldn't. The second piece, which maybe speaks to my shared love and pride of being an adopted San Franciscan 30 years into this, is how few small businesses that I was working with at the time had anything other than, we understand, we're going to do our duty. This is really hard. We know this is going to harm our business, but we're going to follow our mayor. We're going to follow science, and we're going to do the right thing, even though it's going to cause severe impacts on my business. I was not expecting that. I was expecting far more folks to sort of agitate against the imposition of the rules because it was so hard, particularly in the beginning where we had no shared spaces for restaurants. If you weren't an essential manufacturer, you absolutely had to shut down. And, you know, we watched other weird things like Tesla continuing to try to operate, but we didn't see that here in San Francisco. So, and I think sort of moving forward, we've had these successive sets of opening and then closing and sort of opening and masking, no masking. And all along, you know, our business community has been exceptional partners. And I think that speaks to how we approach business as people here in San Francisco, that so many business people are approaching their business as citizens of this wonderful city and county first. And then the business is part of it, but it's not some separate thing that we focus on the P&L of the business sort of in the abstract, disconnected from the role that businesses have in providing economic stability to their workers, in providing healthy and safe environments, and now in co-creating our culture and who we are and what we experience out in our neighborhoods. I think our businesses see that they have a role in all of those things. And that may not be the experience of folks in every city around their business community.
I would just say very early on, really wanted to make sure that we were hearing from the community. And I think I was really grateful that the Economic Recovery Task Force took that approach, that they did have, you know, some may say, and I think both of you were on that, some may have said it was too big, right? But that it really did want to have multiple voices and views and lenses, and then it provided that space for the breakouts and deeper conversations. But then even beyond that, our team, Office of Racial Equity team, was also a part of the core team that was doing the research and evaluation and doing surveys and gathering additional input. So I was really helpful. I was really grateful for that ability to help and participate and engage. And then in terms of informing policy on the back end of it, I think we have been really, what I'm most excited about is the fact that these groups that were really formed in response to COVID will continue to operate and function. Right. And so many of them have really galvanized and come together and leveraged this moment and have been advocating for budget. They have been advocating for space. They've been advocating to be heard. And I think that's what I'm most excited about, is that folks now have not just access to, quote unquote power, but they have a platform and they have access to the resources and the ability to make their case. So it's a more direct connect versus the model where we've seen in the past where advocates act on behalf of community, and now community is activated and able to act on their own behalf and speak for themselves. And I'm very excited to see that continue.
Thank you. I have to tell you both, early on in the pandemic, I was driving around the city and I saw all of these shops boarded up. And I realized that because of the city's engagement with the faith community in particular, and getting us the information in real time, credible information, giving us access to the experts to get clarity on what might have been confusing, we never shut down. We pivoted. We went online. We were learning new things, earn while you learn. And as a result of that, unlike other religious communities throughout the nation, we were far more cautious about opening up. And today, I would say that the precautions and the protocols being taken by houses of worship are probably a little more cautious than even the city's recommendations and advisories. The mayor had asked me to come it was during Passover, Easter was getting ready to come. There was this concern people were going to flock back to the houses of worship. I knew that wasn't going to happen. And I used it as an opportunity really to commend our faith leaders who were really there on the front lines. But when I descended the platform there, I realized that what I was hearing was that attendance was up for worship. And in a lot of cases, so was giving. But that was happening only where the resources were. And that we were a tale of two cities. And that broke my heart. And it kind of, this equity issue, and Sheryl, I'm gonna put my Human Rights Commission hat on because I don't think I could ever take that off. I'm wondering if you'd like to take one more stab at how the faith community can work with you to help address some of those issues. I know you've been doing super work with the Roundtable. Reverend Jonathan Butler's on our board right now, but how can we work better with both of your departments to help be part of the solution?
Well, I will start, and then I will probably have to jump off and leave you with Kate. But I see Pastor Adams join, and it's interesting enough, yesterday I was in conversation with him and some other pastors, and we were just having this conversation about what does it look like to collaborate and partner. And fortunately for us, and I don't know if you know this, Michael, John Mcknight has joined the Human Rights Commission team.
I do, bravo.
So John will be coming to these meetings and will be able to help us stay a little bit more connected and figure out how we share information, how we get the word out. I think we've got resources and access to resources or access to information. We need to do a better job of sharing that information with you so that you can share it with the thousands of congregations that are a part of your group, of the collective here. So that's my number one. Number two, I would say it would be awesome, and I think we've maybe done this once or twice, to be intentional about some of the efforts that we're doing, similar to what you're doing here now. But I think we've done webinars in the past together. We've done some conversations, hosted people. So I would just say really being very intentional about what we do as we move forward, as we partner. For instance, there's an event that Kate's participating in, the mayor's participating in a couple weeks now around guaranteed income. The more we can get folks to participate and understand and get clarity on that, then it's a little bit harder to do some of the media dump that gives misinformation around what those efforts are and what the intention is. So I would just offer that I'm grateful to have John come and be able to join and represent the HRC as well as his role with the Interfaith Council, but then for us to be intentional about future opportunities to partner and collaborate and what that looks like. So I'll make sure that we send you the information about the November 2nd summit so you can share it with your newsletter folks and with the people that you're working with. But thank you so much for continuing to do this work. And thank you, Kate, for inviting me to tag along on this.
I would just add to, and I also will have a fairly hard stop in a few minutes, but wanted to add to an additional way I think we can stay connected on our side is around our workforce development and training programs. We have more training programs and pathways to employment than we've ever had before. And interestingly, we're struggling with lower enrollment in some of those classes, even though we know there's never been more need. So whether it's much of our training is still virtual. So whether there's, folks have concerns, whether it's really what Director Davis just was laying out, that we have to continue to do more around providing an earn and learn model where we have some basic income provided to trainees, which we are launching not only in our Dreamkeeper programs, but for the first time ever, I believe, our City Build program, which trains people in construction. And we have our very first all women City Build class launching. And for the first time, we're going to provide some basic income to those trainees. But it strikes me that perhaps we could dig deeper into using your communication platform across all of your congregations to get the word out about these job seeking and training opportunities could be something we look at going forward as well.
On that note, and we will be ending pronto, I just wanted to share with you your predecessor, Joaquin Torres, who's a dear personal friend, was getting me all of this information, just the relief efforts that you were putting out. And, we inundate our folk with communication. And the reason is because the folks who are eligible for this are sitting in the pews. And we're all over the city. I look at a map and there's 800 dots on it, and we're everywhere. And I just want to let you both know we're here to work with you, and we thank you. We thank you for your work, and we also thank you for your presentation today. And I know you don't get this on other presentations, but we're praying for you.
Thank you. Thanks for the honor of being here.
Okay, Kate, and this will, just so you know, this recording link will be sent out to our 5,000 e-subscribers along with your slide deck and other resource links by day's end today. So those who are not able to be online with us at this early hour will have the fortune of gleaning from your expertise. We also want to invite our attendees and those who are able to join us next Thursday, October 28th at 8:30 a.m. when the San Francisco Director of Behavioral Health Services and Mental Health, Dr. Hillary Kunins, will speak to our city's mental health challenges in these times of the COVID. That concludes our program today. Thank you for being with us. God bless you.